This program is brought to you by Rogers Xfinity, connecting you to more of what you love. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
And welcome everyone, RTV Sports Rap back again. Michael Harris, JC Coots, and Lucas Ireland join me, Spencer Byers, on today's show. And guys, I think we have to start with the Super Bowl. Now, of all the predictions we gave throughout the prop bets and the look through the game the week before, I don't think any one of us would have put money that the Chiefs would have had 23 yards of total offense in the first half, and that the Eagles would have more points than they had yards in the first half, being up 24-zip going into halftime, JC. I don't know what you were seeing from your bar stool, from your TV, but when I was watching it on my phone, I was baffled, bamboozled, completely shocked at what I was watching. What did you see during the Super Bowl as it unfolded?
I mean, the Chiefs kind of looked like a team that either forgot that the game was happening or started on time, or they just figured that they could coast on their own reputation. And unfortunately, that's not how things work, especially when you're trying to do something that's never been done before, which is three-peat in a Super Bowl. I mean, full credit to the Eagles. They did their homework. They knew the playbook. They understood what to expect, and everybody was exactly on their mark. And I think it helps that you lost a Super Bowl just a few years ago, so you have that experience and that stain from losing that you want to win, and it's against an opponent that you know. So this was just not going to work out for the Chiefs. I mean, most of the football world is glad that it didn't go to the Chiefs, although most of the football world didn't care for either of these two teams involved. But it was a game that was unlike any other, and I dare say it was kind of a boring game. Most people checked out after the halftime show or before, if you're not a hip-hop fan. It was a game that really... I think my chicken wing count was only about 8. I'm like, meh. I'm almost tuned out of this game. So it might, in fact, go down as one of the worst Super Bowls in history based on some of the early reviews.
Well, JC, the most viewed Super Bowl ever. It would hit 126 million viewers on average. I think the highest hour was the 8 to 8:15 hour, which was recorded at roughly 138.7 million viewers. So I'm not going to disagree with you that it was boring, especially in that second half, and even in that first half for the Chiefs especially, but it was rather widely viewed. I know a guy who didn't like either team is just like I didn't, Michael Harris, the Steelers fan. Michael, I'd say from what I was watching, from the Chiefs' perspective, it felt like they were the timid team. Like they were the team that hadn't won one yet, that needed to find a way to win a Super Bowl. Not the team that had won a couple, has this dynasty, has all Patrick Mahomes, has all these guys that have been here, done that. It really did surprise me how they came out. What did you see during the Super Bowl?
Well, I have to admit, I did not see any. Well, hang on. I watched the first drive in the lobby of the Laurentian University Athletic Center as my son and his Blue Water Ballistics team were there for a tournament. So we were looking. I had my wife and my son and one of his teammates in the car. And we thought, how great's the drive going to be to have this entertaining Super Bowl to listen to as we drive home? And 15 minutes in, we thought, well, maybe we can just put on some Bruno Mars and listen to that on the way home. But you're right. We listened, and my son and his friend watched, streaming it in the back, and it was just baffling. The fact that the Eagles didn't blitz once, but they got to Mahomes over and over and over again. So they weren't doing anything complicated, but as you both sort of alluded to, it seemed like the Chiefs weren't ready. They took it for granted. I hate to suggest that because this is a team that is still probably going to be a favorite to return to the Super Bowl next year just based on pedigree. But the three-peat is hard. We saw it with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Win 2 in a row, get back to the Stanley Cup final and can't win. And maybe that's just it, that you can't keep enough of those core players around for 3 years, for 4 years, to really do it over and over and over again. So, in the end, kudos to the Chiefs for the run they've been on. And I don't think with Mahomes it's over. But, again, I don't really like the Eagles. Manny, I can't believe he isn't here just to brag about it and talk about it. But maybe he's celebrating wherever he is. Yeah, it just seemed the Chiefs weren't ready. And that second half was just really like trying to listen to it. I thought I need to, but boy, it was difficult to listen to.
What kind of got me also, guys, going now to you, Lucas, was when I watched the game, and I know how smart Andy Reid is. Andy Reid's one of the best offensive minds in football, probably a top five all time with what he's done with the Eagles and now with the Chiefs in this iteration. He will be back next year for Kansas City. Is I'll say the lack of adjustments, but more just they knew after the first four drives that they could not block four defenders. They could not stop the Tampa 2 look, which basically means you rush four and put the other seven guys in coverage. When they knew that, they used a couple different design bootlegs where they make Mahomes go off platform and run out of the pocket. They did it a couple of times, so I know they saw it, but they didn't go to it enough, in my opinion, and it kind of got to them as the game went on because as later in the game when the Kansas City did score 2 touchdowns, it was Mahomes just bombing the ball to Xavier Worthy, the speedster out of Texas, just going, hey, Xavier, go beat your guy and go catch the ball. And that was basically their offense to end the game because Mahomes wasn't comfortable doing anything else. He wasn't comfortable waiting for anything else because he knew that, in all honesty, I'm probably going to get hit. So, Lucas, what was kind of your perspective as the Super Bowl unfolded?
Well, going into the Super Bowl, I mean, we had the props last week, and I was the only one that said it would be a Chiefs victory. And up until the coin toss, I thought that was going to be the case. Kansas City wins the coin toss, and it went downhill from there like nothing else. And it's funny because normally you'd have these teams maybe get a touchdown or two, and then they just can't do anything else after that. The offense falls apart, the defense falls apart. But no, they won one thing, and that was a coin toss. After that, it was all Eagles. And a few little stats to kind of add to this as well, which, as you mentioned right off the top, 24-0 for the Eagles through the first half, only 23 yards for the Chiefs in that half. Only one of those yards was from Kansas City's trio of Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins, and Xavier Worthy. That's insane. Those guys are the guys that you kind of expect to have great games, especially in the biggest game of the year, in the Super Bowl. But Philadelphia just would not let anything through. They played fantastic. Sure, it wasn't the most entertaining of Super Bowls that I have seen, but what made it more entertaining was being in a house full of Eagles fans and hearing them get to cheer and celebrate. It makes me wish that, a team that I cheer for would finally get to this kind of situation and win it. But I mean, congratulations to Philly. They played amazing. And for the Chiefs, I don't know what went wrong for them. They just couldn't get anything going.
It's almost easier to say what went right, Lucas, than what went wrong for the Kansas City Chiefs in this most recent Super Bowl just this past Sunday. I will stick with you, Lucas, though, on Jalen Hurts was named the Super Bowl MVP. I think an interesting question with the way the game went down. And no offense to Jalen Hurts, 17 completions, 22 attempts, just over 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick. I don't think he was that spectacular. He didn't need to be. That's not exactly what I'm saying here. But I think this was a year where you could have picked a defensive player. You could have picked Devontae Smith as the wide receiver with 64 yards and a touchdown. You could have picked one of the defensive players. So I'm going to go to you, Lucas. If Jalen Hurts was not selected as the Super Bowl MVP, who would you have picked on the Philadelphia Eagles?
Well, personally, I don't know a whole lot of names on the Philadelphia Eagles, but what I will say is I do agree that I feel like some of the defensive players were overlooked. I mean, again, 23 yards for the Chiefs in the first half. That was just some incredible defense from Philly all game. And it was something that as I'm watching this, I can't believe what I'm seeing. The Chiefs are a team that have won 2 straight Super Bowls. We know how offensive minded they are, and the Eagles just would not let them do anything. Of course, there was a few touchdowns there near the end in the fourth quarter as well, where it seemed like, okay, they're getting some points and they're not going to win. We knew that they weren't going to win after the first half. I guess you can't really say, no team's going to win, especially if it's the Chiefs. But I think everyone in their mind was thinking, yeah, there's really no shot that the Chiefs come back and win this game because the Eagles defense was just spectacular. They allowed Kansas City's first points, I believe, in the late stages of the third quarter. And it was only, I think, on the one drive, they ended up having more success in the fourth, as I mentioned. But the defense playing the way they did, I absolutely agree that a defensive player could have been the MVP for the Super Bowl. But Jalen Hurts, he did play a very good game offensively to help the Eagles get to where they needed to be. So I'm not too surprised by that pick, but I do agree that a defensive player definitely could have been there as well.
Michael, I mean, you have Josh Sweato at 2.5 sacks. Zach Baum had a pick. Cooper DeJean had the pick 6, which I think was a big turning point in that game. You have a Milton Williams, pardon me, also had 2 sacks. Is there another player you think could have got the Super Bowl MVP this year for the Eagles?
Well, you said him. I think it was Josh Sweat. Like just the pressure that he got. I mean, the sacks are the stats that jump out at you, but the pressure he was chasing him around, chasing Patrick Mahomes around, and those interceptions. We always talk about how that disruption the defensive line puts on the quarterback can cause those interceptions. And while the interceptions are great, I think it's Josh Sweat that could be your Super Bowl MVP if they were looking away from the obvious. He put up the 2.5 sacks, and he was just pressuring Mahomes all night, making life miserable for that offense. And that defensive line in general, basically saying you can't run on us either. I mean, again, it did not seem like complicated schemes, just the athleticism and the power and the readiness of Josh Sweat and his teammates. So that's who I would have gone with, again, if we were going away from the obvious.
What about you, JC? Anyone on the Eagles you think could have won Super Bowl MVP that wasn't Jalen Hurts?
I mean, not really. I think history, unfortunately, works against anybody else on the team. Like, when's the last time a defensive player won the MVP? It just doesn't really happen. You're either handing it off to the quarterback, which is the most likely scenario, or you're handing it off to another offensive player, maybe a wide receiver that gets 2 or 3 touchdowns, or a running back that does like 150 yards, which, I mean, I may be a little surprised Saquon Barkley wasn't in the conversation, but he just didn't get the touchdowns that we thought that he was going to get in this game. So I think that's the only thing that kept him off the podium from getting the trophy. But otherwise, I mean, if you could give it to the defensive core as a collective and say the defense is the MVP, that would have been something for the NFL to do. It would have been a first time, but it would have been accurate in this case because they kept Patrick Mahomes at bay, who he himself is an MVP in a lot of regards. So the fact that they did that, I think collectively, the NFL could have done something never done before and giving it to a group of players.
Yeah, I think we're going to skip over the halftime show because not many people watched it, and the few people that did were not fans of it from what I saw on social media, guys.
Most viewed of all time, 133 million.
Yeah, most viewed, but most hated. I heard everybody said hated it. Nobody seemed to like it on social media, and I don't mind Kendrick Lamar. I like some of his music. Obviously, him dissing Drake makes me oh so happy. I wish Zach Scribner was here so I could make fun of him for liking Drake, but, I'll slide by that. I will kind of go over to the commercials because they're always a topic every year, guys. I'll go quickly around the horn. Michael, I'll start with you. Was there a favorite Super Bowl commercial that you saw either during the Super Bowl or after post after the fact?
Yeah, no, actually, this is rare for me, but I have to pass this one on. I didn't go back and look at any, and of course, I was listening on the radio, so I can't contribute to this one at all. Sorry, guys.
Well, what about you, JC? Any commercials you saw post or during?
I mean, I'm always a sucker for the Budweiser commercials with the Clydesdales, and I think the one this year with the lone horse delivering the keg of beer was pretty awesome, especially with the Oak Ridge Boys blasting in the background. I mean, you gotta love that if you're an old country fan. I also really like the commercial with Canada's Catherine O'Hara and William Dafoe for Michelob Ultra with them playing tennis. I thought that was great. I love the Ben Affleck and the Dun Kings commercial, and I was just today watching, they made like a 6-minute movie of that, which is also hilarious. So I mean, there were some pretty amazing ones. Unfortunately, in Canada, once again, we didn't get to see them. Thanks, Bell. Even though we used to be able to watch them, my old trick was going to the West Coast feed of like whoever was showing the game, like Fox or CBS. This year it was Fox, and they would be there. But no, they're all blacked out. I'm not even sure if you told me I could pay for DAZN and see the American commercials, I would have paid to see commercials. How stupid is it to say that? But it's true. They really did make the game. So I still miss it. And where do I need to sign for the petition? Who do I need to vote for to get my American Super Bowl commercials back?
Well, apparently that's going to be a part of the campaign slogan in our area, JC. And we'll get right on that. Lucas, you watched the game. Any Super Bowl commercials you saw during or post that you liked?
One of the ads that I saw that I thought was pretty entertaining. It got a good chuckle from all of us watching at the Ireland House. That would be the Lilo and Stitch live action ad where you got Stitch on the field and he's just running rampant, and we all got a chuckle when he crashed into the post there, and then took the mic, said whatever gibberish be said, but that was pretty entertaining to watch.
I hope that is a Marshawn Lynch reference, guys. By the way, I saw that one. You saw Lucas, and my brain immediately went to Cal Marshawn Lynch after a win. He almost hits 4 people on the field post game after a win for Cal. Like that's immediately the thought that came into my mind, guys. I hope everyone else kind of got that reference too, if that was the point. Just because every time it makes me think of Beast Mode playing for Cal. We'll move off the NFL. The Four Nations Cup is about to begin I'll say the NHL, but in hockey, with the NHL not taking their couple-week hiatus for technically the All-Star break, but now is the Four Nations tournament. I'll start with you, Lucas, on this one, because Canada, the US, Sweden, and Finland, we've kind of talked about the rosters as they've been released. We talked about the goalies as they've been released. Jordan Binnington is tabbed as the Canadian starter for Game 1 against Sweden. I guess, Lucas, who do you see as the favorite, and kind of how do you see the tournament unfolding as we get closer and closer to it this coming week?
Well, I mean, there's no denying the fact that all 4 countries and all 4 teams look absolutely stacked as far as the rosters are concerned. And personally, I'm really looking forward to this. I mean, this is going to be best on best. I know we had that same kind of conversation with the World Juniors, it being the at least for the most part, the best on best for the young talent from these countries. But this is like the best of the best. National Hockey League players. Of course, there can be and there are going to be some arguments as to could this person have taken a spot instead of this person? Or why was this person left out? This person is, better than this person. Of course, the big one being the goaltending for Canada. But I'm excited. I'm excited to watch it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how Canada does. I think that Canada is the favorite, personally.
Lucas,
but
who
it
wins?
should be a great tournament to watch nonetheless.
I want to know who you think wins. Who wins? Who takes
Canada.
it all? You take the Canadians. Okay. What about you, JC? Who do you like in the Four Nations tournament?
First of all, I don't really know how to feel about this tournament because it's not a true best on best because Czech Republic's not there, Slovakia's not there, Russia's not there. Like this is a sad offering for the World Cup of Hockey, which is what we all wanted, or for the Olympics, which is what we really wanted. So I don't know how to feel about it, but there are some facts that you can't ignore. Number one, Canada does not have the deepest roster. In fact, the U.S. does, and when you look down that roster, there's a lot of depth and not a lot, if any, weak spots on that roster. So that should be concerning. Also, because of the format of this tournament and how quick it is, if you lose 2 games, you're pretty much done. So Canada is in a must-win situation tomorrow night against Sweden, Wednesday night as we're taping this on Tuesday, and a must-win situation against Finland. They're probably not going to beat the States on Saturday, as much as I hate to say that, but I think that they're in trouble. The other X factor in this tournament that you should consider with Sweden and Finland is if you grow up in those countries, your dream isn't to raise the Stanley Cup, it's to win a world championship. So that's why when the world championships roll along in May, usually the guys from Sweden and Finland, they're headed home no matter who they are. If they don't make the playoffs, they have a tournament to play in and they are gone. And it's like pulling teeth to get Canadians and Americans to go to that tournament. So I would say that those teams do have a bit of an advantage in that their players probably know each other a little bit better than the Canadian and American players who didn't necessarily grow up through a national development program and didn't necessarily play together when the games really mattered in a world championships. It's going to be interesting to see. Finland's pretty banged up, but I think if we're picking a winner and you're giving me $10, Spencer, I'm putting it on the USA.
A $10 bet on the US of A. What about you, Michael? We got one for Canada. We got one for the States. You're the tiebreaker right now, Michael. Who do you have in the Four Nations Cup?
Well, Canada's going to win. It's that simple. I think a big deal. Quinn Hughes is a big deal. Not play. He's in my opinion, a much bigger deal not playing than Alex Pietrangelo. I don't mind Pietrangelo as a player, but I actually like Drew Doughty instead of him. I think that replacement for Canada is, if anything, more of an even wash than who comes in for Quinn Hughes. Same if Cale Makar was out for Canada, we'd be in trouble. I'm not as worried about Canada's goaltending, and it's not just a homer thing with Jordan Binnington, but I do think he has the ability to rise to the occasion. And I think there is something to be said, the fact that him and Aiden Hill are the only 2 Stanley Cup winning goaltenders in this tournament. They've both done it. They've been in these high pressure moments. I go back to the Stanley Cup run for St. Louis, and somebody asked Binnington if he was nervous, and he said, "Do I look nervous?" and stared the guy down. That was probably my favorite athlete interview of all time. Do I look nervous? And I do have faith in Canada to do it. I understand what JC's saying about that. The only thing that Finland to me could draw on is that what JC's talked about is their familiarity with each other. They really do develop as a program and have that common development. But I just don't think Finland has the horses right now for lots of different reasons. Sweden always scares you. I'll take what I can get with international hockey. I think the World Championships is a dumb tournament, to be honest with you. And I'm not discounting what JC said, but the best players aren't there. Let's face it. Like, it's kind of a silly thing to call that a World Championship. But again, I understand that, yes, those international players love getting back and representing their country. It's very important for them. That part is very real. Anyway, I have faith in Canada. My money's on Connor McDavid and to put on a good show, and I think Canada can do it.
I will mention one thing about the Finnish team. They're without Miro Heiskanen, their best defenseman. They're without Rasmus Ristolainen, which we can talk about if he is what quality he is anymore, and Yanni Hakanpää. So there were quite a few of their NHL defensemen, even if you don't necessarily think guys like Hakanpää and even in fairness to Rasmus Ristolainen, that they are necessarily great NHL defensemen. Miro Heiskanen definitely is, and him being out of the lineup for the Finns is a massive loss. But now basically everybody's lost somebody. Hughes out for the Americans, Pietrangelo out for the Canadians, Jacob Markstrom right now out for the Swedes, William Karlsson out for the Swedes. I mentioned all the Finns being out, so quite a few injuries going into this thing, and I was wondering kind of in the back of my mind, would that be a factor? Kind of like the All-Star game in both the NBA and in the NHL, because guys do pull out. Guys don't want to play hurt, and they shouldn't have to, in fairness, when they aren't getting paid to really go and play. That isn't for, I'll say, a substantial amount of money like the NHL games are, like for I'll say the Olympics is, where it's on such a big stage where everyone is watching around the world. So, I'm kind of intrigued to see if any other guys do pull out as we get closer and closer to the Four Nations tournament that is coming up in just a couple of days. We'll move off of the Four Nations tournament. We'll now move to the NBA because the trade deadline has now finally passed us, and I think the most interesting move, which now has been finished by the Raptors, was made by the Toronto Raptors. They trade for Brandon Ingram from the New Orleans Pelicans, trade basically Bruce Brown, Kelly Olynyk, and some second-round picks for him. Brandon Ingram then signs a 3-year, $120 million deal with the Raptors, and guys, as an NBA fan, quote-unquote, I cheer for the Celtics, but I do pay attention to other teams. The idea of Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, and Brandon Ingram is scary because all those guys are 6'7" to 6'9". They're all long, and except for Brandon Ingram, they all play really good defense. So that is a worrying three guys at shooting guard, small forward, power forward, regardless of where you chop and change them at those spots. That's a worrying three guys you can put in. I'll start with you, JC, on this one. Kind of, how did you see the trade deadline unfold, and do you think the Brandon Ingram trade was maybe the biggest one we saw?
I mean,
on deadline day, of course.
On deadline day, yeah, I would say it was a bit of a surprise, and you're acquiring a guy right away that has an expiring contract. So the biggest thing is, can you sign him? And as the Raptors were able to do, they could. And by all accounts in the media, he wants to be in Toronto, which is good because they've had more than their fair share of guys in the past that don't want to play in Toronto. So, yeah, it's exciting when you look to the future. But speaking of that future, I mean, they did give up some draft capital to get him. There is a second-round pick in there that you mentioned, but there's also that first-round pick from Indiana that they picked up in the Pascal Siakam deal. So all of a sudden, I mean, you've now lost Siakam for essentially nothing, which is not good for Raptors fans. Like, when you're trying to rebuild, you do need the early draft picks, and you had a high one this year that you gave up in the second rounder, and next year in the first rounder. And basically your attention now is on next year's NBA draft. It's not necessarily on doing anything this season. But the future, I mean, continues to be bright for the Raptors. They're making the right moves. They're making moves that they have to. And sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to make tough decisions to build. They still have some of that front office that were around for a championship and knows how to build a championship. So we might look at these decisions and scratch our heads. But, I mean, we did that leading up to the championship that they won. So these are just the things that happen in basketball. But, again, yeah, I think it was probably the biggest deal on the day. And if you hadn't signed him right away, it could potentially really bite you.
Well, the other big deal I would say on deadline day was Jimmy Butler going from the Miami Heat to the Golden State Warriors. Kind of an interesting trade ish, even though it was the open secret that everyone knew because he got suspended 3 times by the Heat. The relationship continued to get worse and worse and worse with Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler. So we knew he was going to get traded. It just depended on when, Lucas, and eventually Jimmy Butler was traded. I guess kind of what deal did you say is the biggest trade on deadline day? Because obviously I think we all know that Luka Doncic being dealt, period, was the biggest trade going into the deadline. But on deadline day, which trade do you think kind of caught your eye the biggest?
Well, didn't pay too much attention to deadline day, and of course, like you said, I would have went with the Doncic one if there wasn't that ending part to the question. But based on what I've been hearing, I mean, I think the Brandon Ingram one is a big one for the Raptors, of course, and like JC said, he wants to be here, which you don't really hear that too often for Toronto sports fans. It's unfortunate, and there's few reasons behind it, understandable reasons behind it, having American players moving to a different country and all these different aspects can make the decision to not want to play here a little bit easier for them. But him wanting to be here is a big deal, and I like the fact that they're trying to work towards their future. And for Jimmy Butler, I mean, he's not a key piece to the Golden State team. Golden State already has a great team, but the Warriors core with him included, it could help carry them to some postseason success, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens as the season rolls along here.
What about you, Michael? Any trades that kind of caught your eye as the NBA trade deadline came and went?
Well, we can call that Brandon Ingram trade and the Jimmy Butler trade a Raptors trade because, of course, they were included in that Jimmy Butler trade and got 39-year-old PJ Tucker, who's not going to join the Raptors. So I'm being a bit facetious there. But yeah, we've been waiting to see what happens with Jimmy Butler. I don't know if that's a guy. He's a great basketball player, no doubt. But I don't know if that's a guy you can bring in to be part of a winning culture. I think, I don't know. I just that's not who I'd want to pin my hopes on. I guess if I'm going to try and really win and go over the top. Now the Warriors are in a tough spot. It's almost like the Pittsburgh Penguins with the aging stars. What do you do? Maybe for one last kick at it with Steph Curry and some of those guys, you bring in Butler, and he is good enough that for a short period of time you keep him happy, and he thinks there's something there. So it could work. But I do like what the Raptors did. I am not a fan of tanking and going for the first overall pick. I'm not. I think you want to build winning into your culture. And I think, while I'm probably not as big a Masai Ujiri GM fan, I guess he's not the GM, but president fan as some others, I like these moves. He shows that they're not throwing in the towel and going to try and be crummy for 5 years. They've got some good players. They got Scotty Barnes. I like the growth of Grady Dick. If Isaiah Quickly can ever stay healthy, he looks good. RJ Barrett, same thing, really. So I do think, as you pointed out, Spencer, they've got some building blocks. Sorry to see a Canadian go, and Kelly Olynyk. It's kind of neat to have them playing for the Raptors. But overall, I really like what the Raptors did at the deadline.
Well, Michael, you have the bigger star in RJ Barrett, the Canadian on the team. So I think you kind of lose a Canadian, but you still got the star in RJ Barrett, the former Duke Blue Devil. But for Michael Harris, JC Coots, Lucas Ireland, myself, Spencer Byers, and the great Mark Perry behind the camera, we'll see you next week on RTV Sports Rap here on Rogers TV.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Hi, I'm David Shearman, host of Politically Speaking on Rogers TV. Join me this fall for more interviews with our local, provincial, and federal politicians. Politically Speaking on Rogers TV.
Looking for your favorite home renovation shows?
They know what they want. They don't know where to find it.
We do.
Look right here. Only HGTV has all new seasons of Celebrity IOU. The Flipping O Mooses.
Blowing away the competition.
Divided by Design. Hometown.
Yeah, baby!
My Lottery